How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to the Small Talk Show. A very exciting episode for y'all today. Not just because we're doing Dynasty quarterback rankings, but because we have the show's very first guest, a Dynasty guru himself, and that is my good friend Matt Anderegg, Young Egg. I think Twitter, a brand is in the works, but how you doing, my man?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be the first guest. Been a fan since day one, and
2 weeks ago, huh?
yeah, man. I think I have the only comment on one of your YouTube videos.
I mean,
So
not just the only comment, but you were even before the small talk show itself started. You were personally added by yours truly in one of my other podcasts for a refusal to trade me Zach Moss. So I think you had to come on, and we clear the air one way or another. But I mean, thank you for coming on. I'm really excited to break into Dynasty quarterback rankings with you today. Before we get to that surprise question, maybe this will be a segment from now on, but who is the best buy low in Dynasty football right now?
any position,
Any position.
I can think of a few. And I don't want to just recycle Twitter takes, but I do really like a couple guys, positional players. I would say Evan Ingram is one that's very underrated. Um, Still under 30, finished QB2 last year, or sorry, tight end 2 last year, and obviously, right, has a lot of upside now without Calvin Ridley and with a couple more unknowns in that Jaguars offense. Um, Another one that I can think of, and you might be able to tell, buy low on Zeke Elliott, baby. He's
Oh,
getting
yeah.
all the goal line touches. He's back. He's better than ever. And I definitely think he has RB3 upside on any given week, especially given the fact that the Cowboys offense is still going to be just as good as it usually is. We bulked up the interior offensive line too. And I mean, I'll never talk any slander on any Cowboys player, but Rico Dowell is an NPC, man. There's lots of touches to go around, and Deuce Vaughn is a thing of the past. So I like him as well. And I mean, since we're going to be talking quarterbacks, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later. But quite frankly, I was going through a lot of the leagues that I'm in and a couple of the ones that were in the same. And a lot of the champs or people who made it to the finals or semifinals, they had QB2s that aren't necessarily hot commodities. Guys like Matt Stafford, Russell Wilson, surprisingly, in one of our leagues was the QB2 for the guy who actually beat you in the finals. I don't want to, I don't want to have to go too deep into that and bring up the
Too
receipts,
soon
but
still.
yeah, man, there's definitely I feel like a lot of discourse on Twitter and, Keep Trade Cut and all of these major platforms for Dynasty specifically. The hype is always towards first year players, second year
Yep.
players. But a lot of times you leave out the guys who actually, overperform based on their ADP. And for a year or two on a rental for a second round pick or something, you can send them a future second for any league mates that are looking to sell and rebuild. There are definitely a lot of older veteran QBs that can do yourself some good for the recent seasons because, I mean, at the end of the day, right, it's exciting to talk about young players in the tank for the good picks. But what are you doing if you're not trying to eventually win? And so for those that are on the cusp, like myself, I might say, you might want to trade for some of these older guys. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more as we break down these tiers and rankings.
No, the last segment especially ties obviously very well into our rankings, and I think there's one tier in particular as we've kind of done some prep work that it's interesting to compare the rookie quarterback values to the veterans that we have in those tiers because if you attach just the rookie picks themselves to those names, you probably wouldn't value that veteran quarterback the same way. So that'll be interesting to get into, but just your list overall, I think as we get closer to point scoring season, that's when the focus is going to turn to an Engram or to a Zeke Elliott. I think it's fair to say that you do end up paying more for more information as you get closer to the season, as you get into the season, when you try to make some of those moves. But now, not just in that, off-season young player dynasty rookie draft kind of space as we're in, that's when you really can get those bargains if there's a player you're very convinced on. I think Zeke Elliott is a perfect example, or really solving the Cowboys running back room, solving, who's going to be the starter if Chubb doesn't start the season, the Zach Moss or Chase Brown question.
Mhm.
Looking at these teams that where you can make maybe a little more of an educated bet on that undervalued player is where you could end up profiting when it comes time to, win that championship, because that's what we're all here for at the end of the day. Quick little segment just to get us started, and we'll get right into our dynasty quarterback rankings. But let me just go ahead and put the first two players. I'm kind of doing this by my rankings, consensus rankings between us both, but we may freestyle and get into this here. So let me just put in Josh Allen, and damn, how can I not pick out the most famous name in football? There he is, Pat Mahomes. We both have them in this order for our tier 1 of dynasty quarterbacks. Quick notes on why these two stand alone at the top.
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, right? Josh Allen has been QB1 or in the top QB3 at least for the last however many years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no sign of decline. He's still under 30. And the Bills offense this year, obviously there's a couple more question marks, but it almost seems like with a guy like Josh Allen, it doesn't even matter. He still has the high rushing upside. He's got, he just airs that bitch out. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss.
No, we're maybe they'll bleep it out if I can figure out the editing. But no, we want the real takes here.
Excuse my French, but Josh Allen is that guy. He's gonna be that guy for a long time to come. And this is something I also want to get into a little bit later. But for guys with high rushing upside, a lot of times, the age does factor in a bit more earlier than pocket passers like Pat Mahomes or Joe Burrow or other guys. But with Josh Allen, he really has the archetype and body structure to do both. I think he'll adapt well. He has the arm strength and the talent, even in the later years of his career, to still succeed. The Bills offense as a whole, maybe a little bit worse this year since they really didn't add too many people besides rookies. But I mean, with a guy like Josh Allen, it's hard. It's really hard. You're a fool to not take him if you have the first pick in a startup. And obviously, Pat Mahomes, nothing to be said there as well. Last year, he did have a down year in terms of fantasy, which I think is definitely something to consider if you're in like a redraft league, for example. Big names are not always the way to go. And if you're at 102 in redraft, it's an interesting conversation. I guess obviously redraft is more positional players, but sorry, when I say 102, I meant like second quarterback off the board. But in Dynasty, right, Pat Mahomes could argument to be the greatest of all time now, and could be easily the greatest of all time by the time his career is done. And as a fantasy asset in Dynasty, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. I mean, as I said earlier, like completely spot on with your ranking and your reasonings there. Josh Allen, even with the weapons downgrade, it's not really a worry for me because of that rushing floor. I think actually in the last 3 years, it's QB1, QB2, and QB1 for points per game. So really, you can't argue with that. Honestly, The only question I had with this tier is, does Allen even deserve to be in a tier of his own with Mahomes second? And it's hard to say. We both had Josh Allen ahead of Mahomes, but I think Mahomes, yes, he has shown the downside of the last season, only 17.5 points per game compared to Josh Allen up at 23. But the Chiefs also went from 3.5 touchdowns a game to 2.2 from 2022 to 2023. They've generally, under Mahomes, been amongst the top 5 in that metric and fell to league average last year. A lot of that was due to the lack of weapons Patrick Mahomes had. but also due to their defense really being an elite unit, and they leaned on that, and scores were generally a little lower. Now, with the addition of Hollywood Brown as well as Xavier Worthy, we'll see what happens with Rashee Rice, but it's gone from maybe a bottom 5 weapons unit to definitely respectable, at least shall we say. So honestly, no concerns with me for Patrick Mahomes there. Good point though on redraft, and that's where maybe some of the next guys we put up on the board may have a case over Mahomes. So let me just go ahead. Damn, I'm really not doing well with these small faces. All right, there's the guy. We had Caleb, and I actually had Burrow ahead of Caleb. But going with our tier 2, let me just list out Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, and Caleb Williams. This was my rankings coming into it. I believe you had the exact same in your tier 2, at least, if not the same rankings. Where do you disagree with kind of the order that I've placed them in? And we obviously have a second-year player and a rookie in this tier. Why do you see cases for upside with the likes of like Stroud, maybe an easier answer, and then Caleb Williams, maybe the more interesting one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this a lot off air, and I'm maybe one of the biggest Caleb truthers. Being from Berkeley, there's not a whole lot of hope in our own program, but I did watch a lot of Pac-12 games, and that was mostly involving USC and Caleb Williams. I agree with this tier. I have the same 3 through 7 names, but I do have a couple discrepancies in terms of rankings. And at the end of the day, right, they're all elite assets at this point in time. And I also think, different leagues have different scoring. So this could also vary. But considering we're going with the standard, half PPR, 4-point passing touchdown, I do agree with this tier. I personally have Caleb Williams ranked as my 5th highest QB in Dynasty. And it's hard to justify that when he's an unproven asset at this level. But I mean, the hype is blasphemous at this point, and it's almost setting him up to fail. But I truly believe that Caleb Williams is bust proof, and I'll put my legacy and I would bet my life savings on it. This guy at USC was an absolute stud. He never threw more than 5 interceptions in a whole college season. He also has rushing upside, 210 rushing attempts over the last 2 years, 22 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. And again, right, looking back last season, people might say it was a down year. That really could be attributed to USC's defense being Swiss cheese garbage. Like those games, for those who watched, Caleb Williams was having teams. We had the Cal Bears drop 45 points or something like that on that USC team, and it's hard to compete when teams are putting up that much consistently. It's hard to compete, and also, right, you go from 2 years ago to last year. He lost Addison. His top receivers were Rice and Taj Washington, I think. So it's almost similar to like a Pat Mahomes type thing where his weapons downgraded, but he still excelled in a lot of metrics, and he goes to perhaps one of the best offensive schemes or offensive personnel groups, at least in the entire NFL now. The Bears put in a ton of work on that offense this offseason. They're bringing back a decent amount of their defense from last year, which also was a top 10 group. And I really think he has all the things to succeed. It's a lot different than the scenarios that you look at for some of the last, messiahs of the draft, right? Trevor Lawrence went to a disastrous situation with Urban Meyer in his first year. That Jags team was awful. And then before that, the next greatest thing was probably Andrew Luck, and he too went to a Colts team that was decimated. They got the first overall pick for a reason. And people forget that the Bears got the first pick, but it wasn't because they were bad. It was because they got it from a different team, which we'll touch on later. The Panthers, different scenario there. They're looking a little bit shaky. But Caleb Williams, love the guy. I think he's well deserving of 105. And honestly, I think in the next year or two, he could easily be in that S tier as well. But besides that, yeah, I'm a little lower on Lamar. I have him ranked as my sixth quarterback. And I think mainly that's because I touched on Josh Allen earlier, him being a little bit more isolated and safe from that fall off of rushing quarterbacks. I don't see the same arm talent from Lamar Jackson, and I think he thrives in the system in Greg Roman's system with that, which was run heavy and a lot of RPOs. We'll see how he does this year. Obviously, for this season, still a lot of high upside. They added a couple. One of my favorite dynasty sleepers in Devontae Walker. I think he's a great fourth round flyer. I like him as a wide receiver prospect. And Lamar for this season will still be elite and probably for the next 3 or 4 years as well. But as he gets older, it's hard to project those picks. And when you're talking about a top 5 startup pick in Dynasty, you probably are going to be wanting to look farther than the next 2 or 3 years. So regardless, though, he's my number 6 compared to your number 4. And I also have Caleb at 5, which puts Burrow at 7. It's all at that point, though, it's all hit or miss, and they'll probably all average, within 1 or 2 fantasy points per game of each other anyways on any given week.
Yeah, and honestly, great point that you left on, because that ties into the point I want to make. But I guess in general, you can't miss with this tier, right? And for any of you watching, if you had Caleb as high as QB3, I'd be all right. Let's rein that in. But any of these players interchangeable, you want them on your teams. I think the point that I want to get to and why that relates to the point scoring is KTC has CJ Stroud as the QB3. Now, both of us did have Jalen Hurts at QB3. My Lamar ranking kind of ties into that, and good that you brought it up. This would be for a general 4-point passing touchdown league, where I personally will value that ceiling that a rushing quarterback brings. In that same final that you referenced that I unfortunately lost to a guy, he didn't have a QB2 in the game, but he had Lamar Jackson, who was the QB1 on the week and put up I think a 36 or a 38-point week. And that's just the ceiling that these rushing quarterbacks do have access to. Lamar, more so than Hurts, is actual yardage that he puts up, between the 20, shall we say. Maybe a little, I think fairly, I should downgrade the rushing touchdown upside a little bit with King Henry there now compared to, Gus Bus, Justice Hill, and really no one's compared to Derrick Henry. So I actually would probably agree. I'll shift him down to QB5. But CJ Stroud, I think the one where, now it's a one spot discrepancy, but for me, I just can't put those more traditional pocket passers, or at least the quarterbacks you expect the majority of fantasy points to come from just passing and passing touchdowns, over a Hurts or a Lamar, because it also, when you go season from season, touchdown totals are very volatile, and that's that upside you need to access like the Mahomes ceiling. But yeah, otherwise in general, just sum up this tier, you want everyone here, and I think Caleb very fairly part of a pretty elite company. I think most importantly, not just the prospect profile, but what gives me a little more confidence in the success, as you touched on, was the weapon grouping. Has a rookie quarterback ever gone into a situation like this?
Not in recent memory, that's for sure. I mean, as the first overall pick, it's really hard to fall into something as good as the Bears have, right? And just before we move on, just one quick thing that is crazy is Jalen Hurts had 25%. Obviously, look, you see my jersey. As a fantasy guru, I have to put aside my alliances. But Jalen Hurts had 25% of his points last year come from the tush push, and it'll be interesting to see. I don't know how much Saquon will fall over at the one as DeAndre Swift did last year. I could definitely see something. Also, I was thinking about when making my rankings was the volatility of a lot of these assets, and I think in terms of this tier, Jalen Hurts, while he does have the stats to back it and obviously the output, I would say he's arguably the most volatile of this entire tier. Um, you cut those in half, and he becomes somewhere along QB 6 to 8
Yeah.
on the year, and it easily throws some discussions on the Eagles' offense is great by all means, especially after adding Saquon, and it'll be interesting to see how much that bites into his production. Obviously, they lost Kelsey at center this year as well.
Mhm.
Their offensive line may not be as good. Um, and I hope they aren't for personal reasons. But anyways, regardless of that, right, biases aside, Jalen Hurts, a lot of volatility. Whereas you look at these young prospects like CJ Stroud, maybe the fantasy output isn't as good as these other prospects, or like you said, the ceiling of
Mhm.
Lamar Jackson is inarguably, I think, higher than CJ Stroud. I think when we're talking dynasty, though, also age factors in as well.
Mhm.
And CJ Stroud is only a couple months older than Caleb Williams. So he's got
Oh,
a full season under his belt. Obviously, a great season. He had a concussion that held him out for a week or two. But besides that, right, QB8 overall in terms of point per game, which is amazing for a rookie quarterback. And his offense only got better. So they added Joe Mixon this year. Obviously, they added Stephon Diggs. The sky is the limit for CJ Stroud. But I think his value is a lot more insulated than someone like QB3 Jalen Hurts.
damn. Now I might just have to. Am I going to edit out what I just said? Because I kind of want to put Stroud at QB3 now. And I think you made a great point. For me, yes, I agree with the tush push coming down, not both with Saquon and Kelsey, like you said. Maybe this is where I'll diverge a little bit from you, but I still rate Kellen Moore, who is going to be the new offensive coordinator for the Eagles next season. And, you know, maybe Kellen Moore is not the guru that he seemed this time last year when he was going to link up with Justin Herbert, but the Eagles' offensive scheme to end 2023 was honestly one of the worst in the entire league. I would say it was just straight, 11 personnel, one of the lowest across the league in motion. And at least Kellen Moore, say what you will about actual success and how the Cowboys, took a step forward after he left. He is at least an innovative play caller, and I think the Eagles just have one of the best personnel rooms, man for man in the league. As far as their skill players, and obviously Jalen Hurts. But I just want to end this Jalen Hurts point on, and why I think if we agree here, I might actually move CJ Stroud back up. Is Hurts is almost less insulated in a people's perspective, people's opinion of him point of view. Everyone else here was like a bulletproof prospect as well, right? They're all like very flashy names. But Jalen Hurts, even just 2 years ago, people were wondering if he should be out of the job. And pretty much it was just his fantasy points that was holding him in way higher regard than anyone actually had of him as an NFL QB. So that's where, let's say he does have a down season, if the tush push points go down and maybe the Kellen Moore bump doesn't really amount to enough to make that up. If he finishes as QB6, let's say, right, he could fall out of his tier, out of an elite tier from like a dynasty perspective. So actually, I think I would agree with the masses in putting CJ Stroud ahead. I think, the age and then the addition to the weapons group now, it's like this is going to be one of the most exciting offenses, right, in the NFL. So I think this is a good set for our QB. Damn, Caleb 5'7". We'll just have to leave that now for the show, because let's move on to our next tier. And I think now is when the discussion is going to get a little more interesting. We spoke a little off air about perhaps splitting this tier, but let me just put first forward everyone who we had in this tier, and then we can dive into the names a little bit more. All right, a lot of names just went up on the board, and that's why, I mean, maybe fairly a tier break could come into play, but in some order from QB8 down all the way to, damn, is that QB15? We kind of loaded QB talent, huh? Like, these are all like premium dynasty assets, and that's the top 15 QBs. That's honestly crazy. But Justin Herbert, Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, and Jayden Daniels. kind of fit into our tier 3 for now, just one tier. Where do you want to start off this discussion?
Well, based on personal moves I made this year, and also just I am a truther. Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I really am buying low on. I don't know if you could consider buying low, considering he's still going in the early third as a startup ADP. But when you look at last year, he was going in the late first. So he's heavily discounted this year, and I don't even think it's really his fault. For those who followed the Jags last year, it's he was playing on a busted ankle for several weeks. The Jags' offensive line, for lack of better, I mean, they sucked. They sucked. They underperformed, and the Jags addressed a lot of these issues that were with Trevor Lawrence by doing some things that will basically fix that. They brought in 2022 Pro Bowler center from the Bills, Mitch Morse. Obviously, right, Calvin Ridley's out the door, but then they brought in Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., which both compared to Calvin Ridley are probably a downgrade, but I do think they fit his scheme a lot better. Gabe Davis is great inside the numbers on some going up the field. Calvin Ridley played predominantly outside the hash marks, and that's based on last season, definitely not Trevor Lawrence's greatest strength. He's certainly more accurate over the middle, and I think that with Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis opening up the field, Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram will feast, as well as Parker Washington. Who knows? Maybe he gets some looks as well this year, because in limited time last year, he definitely had some fantasy relevancy and was quite good. So I'm very high on Trevor Lawrence. I think people are quick to forget how highly touted he was coming out of Clemson. The dude can ball. He's only 24 and a half. Like he's a young asset, and he's coming up on a contract year. So I think that all those things combined provide both short and long-term prospects for T-Law. Obviously, right, that's kind of been the story for the last 3 years. In my eyes, he's only a third year because Urban Meyer sucks ass and is a horrible coach. And so that first year with Trevor Lawrence, I don't even count it as a real season for him. Now, though, he's had a couple years under Pedersen. I think he's definitely feeling a lot more comfortable. He's got some new young weapons. I really like Brian Thomas Jr. He's my wide receiver 4 for the rookies. And all those things combined, I really think T-Law's set up for a good year. And I think where a lot of people might look at this list and have some complaints is having Jordan Love ranked behind a couple of these guys, notably Kyler Murray and Trevor Lawrence. So maybe why don't you go? I'm interested in knowing. I know you're a big Kyler guy, so maybe I'm interested to hear why Jordan Love is so low.
Yeah. And just to go over quick KTC numbers, Jordan Love is the 15th, is QB10, 15th overall player. Murray is QB11, but he's 23rd overall, and Trevor Lawrence is QB13, 28th overall. So yeah, let's get right into, because I actually had Jordan Love ahead, and as I was just doing some research, for me, that him and T-Law are really so too close to call. And I'd probably give the edge to Love just because I believe in the coaching staff Doug Peterson's probably before my limited time, but kind of what we saw from the coaching staff, the confusion between is Doug Peterson or Press Taylor calling plays. And when you contrast that to what the Packers have with Mike LaFleur, I maybe feel just a little bit better about that situation. But I think for me, I think Kyler Murray is deservedly QB10, and honestly, that's probably where I'd put my tier break and shift the rest of the guys to the tier below. And I hate to be that guy harping on the rushing points, but it is, we're playing fantasy football, right? We're not playing, we are not in the NFL, and just with the mathematics of rushing yards versus passing yards and rushing touchdowns versus passing touchdowns, I think you have to give the edge to Kyler Murray, who has never finished lower than QB6 in a points per game basis in a fully healthy season. Last year, coming off the ACL, still averaged over 30 rush yards per game. Doesn't sound like too much, but Kyler Murray starts with a 3-point head start on most of these other quarterbacks, if you put it that way. So that's why I think both of us are higher in our guys than maybe the KTC average. I would probably take Murray and T-Law from, let's say anywhere from 111 to 204 in a startup draft. But I think maybe we also build on quarterbacks a little more, but that's higher than 23rd and 28th overall. That is my case, though, for putting the tier break, because I, again, just think that Kyler and Anthony Richardson probably doesn't need really too much behind him, even though we've seen the least out of him from any NFL veterans, right? But they just have an access to a ceiling that I struggle to see the others in this tier, bar Jayden Daniels, reach. And then Justin Herbert has proven he has that elite ceiling, even without the rushing upside. He's finished as QB2 overall before, but redraft, I mean, he's going as QB17 right now in underdog. If that tells you how people are anticipating the 2024 season to be, do you think a tier break would be fair? I mean, you have T-Law. I think T-Law had over Murray. Or do you think my point about the tier break makes sense and is fair there?
I could see an argument for it, but at the same time, I do think that I don't know. I don't see enough difference in these QBs to warrant a clear break. Maybe like a 3A versus 3B.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, all of these quarterbacks have a very high ceiling. Some by way of passing, while others of like you mentioned, right, the rushing upside. And I do want to point out you left Dak Prescott out of the high ceiling, but my dog in his last 3 healthy seasons has been QB2, QB8, where he only played 16 games, and QB3.
Yeah.
So, don't sleep on my boy. All right. That's my quarterback.
Yeah.
The Cowboys, we still run the East. And we're winning the Super Bowl this year.
I think with Dak and Jayden Daniels are probably actually, maybe there's another fair case for keep the first 5 and then have another tier break. Dak, I don't disagree at all with the ceiling, and if anything, yeah, we bigged up Zeke Elliott at the start of the show, but if anything, they could even lean on the pass even more than they did last year, and that was already a high volume and high efficiency offense. With Dak, it's the age and contract uncertainty. Dak's gonna get the bag and be a starter in 2025, even if that's in Dallas or not. But we don't know if he's gonna be attached to CeeDee Lamb or does he go into a run-heavy scheme. So there's a little more uncertainty there, plus the age. Jayden Daniels is the Pandora's box, if you will, of this tier. I think fairly does warrant a place in this conversation. I've seen people in the Dynasty industry have him as high as QB6 in Dynasty, which all right, that's a little drinking the Kool-Aid for me, but hard to deny with what he did, especially in his last college season. Any thoughts on Jayden Daniels?
I mean, yeah, if we're talking about volatility here, right? Next season, Jayden Daniels could be a first-round starter pick, and he could be like a 5th-round starter pick. This guy has unlimited potential, but also right, a lot of film guys, people who are far more knowledgeable than me, maybe not so high on Jayden Daniels. So in those scenarios, I usually tend to rely on the experts over myself, because what is me, grinding, watching 3 screens on any given Sunday, gonna know better than someone who actually does this for a career. But Jayden Daniels, yeah, he's obviously his college tape in his last year was electric, but he's an older prospect, and everybody knows by now the guy takes huge hits for no reason. But that's something also I think that's gonna. I think this tier has a lot of things that get blown out of proportion. Justin Herbert, for one, you mentioned it earlier, his redraft ADP. I think that's just a doomsday outlook. That's Greg Roman's the end of it. His weapons do kind of suck. But I mean, at the end of the day, right, Justin Herbert is certainly one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL. I think he makes do with what he's got. I do think, going back to sleepers, I think that Josh Palmer is a very good buy low and a late round flyer. And then, yeah, but going back to Daniels, right? This guy also comes into a pretty good, not as good as Caleb, but he does have some good weapons. McLaurin and Jahan Dotson looking for a bounce back year. I do think that Daniels is not going into as bad of a situation as it could be for a rookie. And given his rushing upside too, he does have right and this is something too, right? It's a lot of things in fantasy that don't necessarily correlate to NFL success. We saw Justin Fields be like a top 5 quarterback in fantasy for the last 2 or 3 years, but he won like 5 games in those 3 years. So for the short term, I think Jayden Daniels has very high upside, regardless of how he performs in the NFL. If we're talking about spending a top 3 dynasty rookie draft pick on him, it is certainly risky, and you may be inclined to go for a safer pick like Drake May. But again, yeah, if we're talking about the tier break, I do potentially see cutting this tier off after Jordan Love. And again, it's only because Dak is older and Jayden Daniels is so volatile. Dak is the only quarterback on this list that's over 30. So I do see an argument for that. But in terms of fantasy output, right, all of these guys in this tier could easily get you a 30-point game on any given week. So I do like the upside of all these guys. And I actually think that these are some of the best values in startup drafts at this time of year, right? Like if I'm drafting right now, I'm probably trading out of picks that would guys like CJ Stroud. Love the guy. He's young. He's talented. But I do think you can definitely pick up and be a shark when there's blood in the water and pick up some guys like Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, and have almost equal, if not better, right? Because if we're talking on a points per game basis, Jordan Love was the 6th overall quarterback in points per game basis, and Dak was 4th. And both of those beat CJ Stroud handily. So if we're talking about trying to win now, maybe you're not necessarily interested in tanking, and you're trying to draft good value to try and compete right off the bat in a startup. I actually think this B tier is probably the best value you can get, bang for your buck, in terms of proven talent and proven fantasy success, as well as a good price on them. So,
yeah, honestly, completely. I think you're completely spot on there, and this is it really is a big contrast to the startup draft that we did a year ago, where after you got to a certain point around the turn, the mid second just seemed like such a flat tier. And especially in terms of quarterbacks, there wasn't one that I really wanted to take. I think we were in a draft back to back where you first took Waddle, and then we felt like there was a tier break, and then it was Olave. But now, if you let's just take the KTC rankings: Justin Herbert 16th overall, Anthony Richardson 12th overall, Kyler 23, Jordan Love 15th, Trevor Lawrence 28, Jayden Daniels 27, Dak Prescott 37. Now this is KTC overall rank. I think there might be like an early first pick value in there or something, but I think your point is really spot on. It's great trade back value. You covered a lot of the points that I think we discussed from this question, but the trade that you did make for Trevor Lawrence was sending the 105 and T. Higgins to get Trevor Lawrence. I presume at the 105, you would have taken Jayden Daniels. Would that have been correct?
Yeah, and I think about this trade a lot because I do think, well, first of all, I want to say trading for quarterbacks is one of the hardest things to do in Dynasty because I think that the trade calculators do an awful job of really valuing different quarterbacks, especially when we're talking about Superflex. So, yeah, I traded 105 and T. Higgins for Trevor Lawrence. And, Keep Trade Cut said I got waxed. And maybe I did, right? Because if Jayden Daniels becomes anything remotely close to his ceiling, if he becomes 80% of what Lamar Jackson has been, I definitely got fleeced.
Yeah.
But my roster, I may be delusional, but I think I can compete. And I had a lot of wide receiver twos. So I was looking to offload some wide receiver twos, especially one as volatile as T. Higgins, to basically get, in my opinion, what's going to be a top 6 to 8 fantasy quarterback after this season. I think Trevor Lawrence has a great chance to improve his ADP, whereas Jayden Daniels could significantly decrease his ADP as well. He could increase it too, though, right? Jayden Daniels is honestly him and maybe JJ McCarthy, to me, are two of the most like head scratching prospects that could go either way, and I wouldn't necessarily be all that surprised. So yeah, again, this tier I think is great value. I think these are people that if you have a middling first round pick in a startup, these are guys who I would target around the turn in the second round. And I would focus on getting, a Jettas or a Jamar or Bijan type talent in the first round to basically solidify your QB1 and your top positional player for years to come.
Yeah, or even move back from the middle of the first to like 111, grab a next year's first on it, and then you still can go so many different ways in 111 and
Mm-hmm.
then still get one of these quarterbacks. Yeah, so I definitely love that plan there. So that was the B tier again. Just solid doesn't cut it. Like an excellent tier of assets and really all cornerstone assets with high ceilings and some floors a little lower, but we play this game to win, right? And that's why these assets are valued so highly.